Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where we strive to follow the admonition of Benjamin Franklin, who said that it's always a good idea to question authority, and that was the underpinning of being a good patriot. I don't care if you're, a big fan of Franklin. I don't care if you're living in the United States. That's good advice. Okay? That's really good advice. To always be willing to question the dominant paradigm that exists wherever and whoever says something, including yours truly. If you want to question what I have to say, I really encourage you to do so, because I don't want people just accepting something just because they hear it on a broadcast or hear it on a YouTube video that is out there. So anyway, tonight, what I would like to deal with is an issue that is guaranteed to be controversial. And you know what? I have no proof one way or another of the things I'm going to be talking about, but there are many studies that might suggest that there could be a correlation with many of our problems in society with the whole idea of birth control. Now you're probably thinking, whoa, what are you talking about? Well, the thing is that you've got to admit that from a basic Darwinian viewpoint, your number one goal is to multiply and replenish the earth. Ooh, that sounds like the Bible too, doesn't it? So anyway, that's Darwinianism. By the way, Charlie Darwin had 10 kids. And it's also something you find in the Bible. So this is something I think intersects very closely, the idea that having a family is a good thing. Now, the reason why this can actually cause people to feel a little uncomfortable is that our society, ever since the 1960s, in the Western world, I would say Europe and the United States, has embarked on just the opposite. It seems that there are so many policies out there and also ideas that are trumpeted in the dominant media that it seems like, if you want to shack up with two guys and two girls, or a guy of the same gender, or mix and match any way you want, hey, that's okay. If you want to stay single, or even if you're married, I guess, but mostly if you stay single, you just go out there and play the field and play sexual roulette with people. In our society, that seems to be what is promoted as being the ideal. But yet, if you present people that want to, as their number one goal, have a family, a traditional family, then all of a sudden it's like, oh ho ho, you might as well just raise the cross in front of a vampire, because now people are like, oh wow, wait, and they start listing off the problems. If you're a young couple, you just got married, let's just say, 25-year-old young couple, they just get married, and everyone's asking, well, what do you want to do? And you say, well, what we're going to do first is we're going to buy a new car. We thought we'd buy a really nice fancy sports car or something. Most people would in our society be like, hey, that sounds cool, man. Instead, if you say, oh, we're going to start trying to have a baby as soon as possible, and it's like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, are you sure? And you know what? You'll get that kind of response even in conservative religious circles. Why? Because conservative religious people live in a society that they obviously not only interact with, but also acts upon them. Remember what Edward Bernays said? We are all influenced by people that we don't know, by unseen forces within the society that dictate our tastes, our values, and our behavior. Okay, you can't get around that. The clothes you wear, the food you eat is determined by the society. That's why people think, oh, gee, I'd never eat such and such, what they eat in China or what they eat in this other country. But the thing is, in that other country, in that other country, they may see a lot of the foods people eat in America or Britain as being weird. Okay, actually, there's some of the food in Britain I'd much rather eat in China than some of their dishes like blood pudding. Ugh. But anyway, the thing is that the society does have a huge impact on us, and I believe that there is a very strong force that is out there that works on people 24/7, not just to convince but reinforce you that the norm in our society is, if you get married and if you have kids, you should only have two. Now, I know there's people out there, like double income, no kids, that'll say, oh yeah, wait, the pressure's on people like us. Well, take a look at TV. How many couples are presented on TV as being married but with no kids versus how many are presented on TV that are single and already have reached their 30s and no kids? And how many are presented as being mom, dad, and kids? And on top of that, mom, dad, kids, and happy. I think it's pretty self-evident that this society is more geared towards childlessness, or at least a small family if there is a family. Now, I'm going to present something here that I think could be controversial, and that is, I believe that a lot of our problems we may be having is based on going against biology. Now, this is something that someone could be an evolutionary psychologist or devoutly religious, at least part of one of the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and find some agreement. So, the reason why I'm doing this particular show is the other day, my daughter just out of the blue asked the question, do you think that depression, that so many young people today have depression in today's Western society, is due to not having what would be considered traditional families? They're either single, or if they are married, they don't have children, or if they do have children, they stop at a point that is artificial. What is it? The number one form of birth control in the United States is sterilization. So it got me thinking. And then I started thinking about the aspect that we talk about both psychological and, usually we couch that in the term anthropological because we don't want to talk about psychology of animals. But I'm going to say this, psychology in animals and also their physiology, we're quite comfortable in saying, oh, this is due to their wanting to have babies. This is for their reproduction. This is so that they pass their genes on into the next generation. But if we talk in those same terms about people automatically just put these barriers up, like, whoa, don't talk like that to me. But you know what? Human beings actually do have a large portion of their brain devoted to these kind of base drives, if you want to call them base. I would question that, but people do. And the other things like hormones, they exist in human beings too, and they may be acting in ways that affect your psychology all the time. But yet human beings are resistant to that because we want to believe that we're not governed by outside forces. But yet, actually, the more you don't believe it, the more you actually are governed by those outside forces. We know that politically, we know that psychologically. I think it also is true with physiology. Now, I'm just going to give you just one example of how our physiology actually is still based on, if you want to call it, the jungle, and how it affects us in modern society. And that is that human beings are designed that when there is food, we eat. Now, if anyone has seen that TV series, what is it called, on Discovery, it's called Naked and Afraid. And in that show, they stick man and woman out in the middle of nowhere with no clothes on, and they have to survive for like a month or so. The thing is that their number one preoccupation, even though they may come from very educated, comfortable backgrounds in modern society, is to get food and then to get shelter. Okay? And the thing you have to consider is, in a natural setting, for those of you who have done any hiking in the woods or something, you realize that you don't just come across food all the time. You can in our modern society. You can go out there, to any store, Albertsons, Safeway, whatever, and you could find anything you want. And if you've got the money, you're going to be able to indulge anytime. Many parts of the United States, you can go there anytime. 3 in the morning. Oh, I'm hungry. I think I'll run down and grab myself an ice cream at the local store, because they're 24 hours. In natural society, that doesn't exist. It doesn't. Think about those times you've been hiking in the woods and you don't see an animal. You might see one animal, and it might be a squirrel or something. And then not only do you not see the animals very much, if you do see them, you've got to have the skill to be able to kill them so you can eat them. So that leaves us a problem, doesn't it? If you're out in the middle of nowhere, what do? Well, human psychology would suddenly go and revert back to its normal urges. Actually, I would argue it wouldn't have to revert back very much at all. You would eat whatever you could get your hands on, and you would have long periods of hunger between those times that you got your hands on something. So we still have that ingrained in us, even though we live in a modern society and have done so for at least the last 100 years in Western society, where you're probably not going to starve to death. Our bodies are still programmed to want to forage and eat when it's available. The problem is that makes us obese, because we don't move as much as we used to. You look at a picture of people back in the 1950s, and what do you see? You don't see very many obese people at all. Why? Because most people had jobs that still required a great deal of physical labor. You work in a lumber mill or a steel factory, or even putting cars together, you move a lot. But yet in our modern society, you don't move so much. But yet we still have all that food available, and we still have our subconscious going, there is food, you must eat. And it takes actually a great deal of willpower to be able to say no to that. So, 1950s, obesity, especially in young people, didn't see hardly any of it. Now that we're in 2014, going on 2015, you see it everywhere. And it's catching on all around the world. Even in China, they're starting to have problems with obesity. So the thing is, it's because our natural bodies are still in control. Now, it's easy for us to see that. It's like, hey, that makes sense. But what about the effects of our thwarting reproduction? Think about this. If you live in a society like, you live in many societies even today in more remote areas of the Middle East, or if you live in Africa, you may start your family at a very young age. You've barely been through puberty, and you may be getting married off. And then you start your family. And, things just, it's pretty natural in that society that you may be having kids until menopause. And so if you look at birth trends in Uganda or something, the average woman has like 7 or 8 kids. And that's average woman. There are some women that can't have kids, or women that live in the cities like Kampala or something like that generally have smaller families. So most people in the society are having lots of kids, okay? And contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of those children are living to adulthood. There's this myth that, people in societies where you have large families, the children just don't live, and that's obviously not true. When England started growing because of its growing prosperity, when the industrial age started, and also vaccination. That enabled England to have more soldiers, but they didn't have as much work at home, so these soldiers went out and were able to conquer a good portion of the world and maintain it. But that was because there were lots of kids surviving until adulthood. So, with the advent of the birth control pill, which I will note, one of the inventors, I read an article where he said that they actually expected that when people had control over their fertility, they would still have a positive birth rate. They had no idea that birth rates would plummet way below replacement. But anyway, that's beside the point. The thing is that most people in modern society do not have more than 2 kids. And a very large portion have no kids. And therefore you get averages like in Italy, like 1.1 children per woman. So if, I guess in a hypothetical situation, you got 3 couples, one has 2 kids, one has 1 kid, and one has no kids, you average it all together, you've got about what the Italian birth rate is. And that means it'll shrink eventually, unless you come up with some sort of nanotechnology that'll keep people alive, like that, back in Noah's day. The thing is that the birth rate has gone really low. And it also means then that people's focus is not on reproduction anymore, for the most part. Now, how does that affect us? Well, it's really kind of strange that if you look at evolutionary psychology, you find that there are some weird things that tell us about human nature. It tells us about that subconscious part of us that is still in full operation. There was a study I read a while back in which they were testing the amount of tips that strippers made. And they had some of the strippers that were on birth control pills, which actually prevent ovulation, and some that were more natural. They weren't on any kind of birth control pills. And the funny thing was that the ones that were not on birth control, during their ovulatory periods where they could actually get pregnant, men gave way more tips. Now, there's a lot of things you can look at there. Was it that the woman had more energy, or was it that men in some way can detect when a woman is in a fertile period? Who knows? But the thing is that obviously behavior shifts when reproduction does come in, to the point some people aren't even aware of it. Other studies have shown that women wear more revealing clothes when they are ovulating. They prefer more masculine men when they are ovulating. When they're on their menstrual cycle, they wear less revealing clothes. They prefer men that are more nurturing, more feminine during those time periods. Now, there's a lot of psychology involved in all of this, and most people, again, are not even consciously aware of it. But if this is taking place, if our bodies are primed to want to reproduce, then today's society has had to have had an impact on that. So what could some of those impacts be? I'm just wondering something. Back to my daughter's question about depression. It has been shown that girls are going through puberty at a younger age. Now, most people say, well, it must be because they're eating better than in the years past. I don't know if they're eating better than they did in years past. But I heard about a study. I didn't read this one, but I heard about a study in which the conclusion of the researchers was that when young women feel their tribe, again, back to our biology, our tribe, those who are significant others that we identify with as being part of some belonging sort of grouping, when the tribe is under threat, they go through puberty at a younger age and I guess become more fertile. Now, something that could support that is there's been research on what life was like after the bubonic plague decimated Europe. And one of the findings that I thought was really interesting was that women were said to be way more fertile. Now, of course, you could say, well, maybe the women who were healthiest survived the plague, and the weaker ones died, and maybe the weaker ones were less fertile. Who knows? But it might be that when you look around and you see that your village is decimated, you might, your brain might be going, let's make up for this. And therefore, the body starts responding accordingly, and fertility goes up. Now, think about today's society. I mean, the brain is still taking in information that most of our information is never really at our awareness state. Do you suppose that maybe the reason why younger women particularly have become almost what our society is saying hypersexualized may not just be because of the effects of music videos and the fashion industry and stuff like that, but it also might have a biological component in which young girls are going through puberty earlier, and maybe, like I said about the revealing clothes, they're subconsciously being influenced to behave in ways that attract male attention. Now, I'm not saying that they're all just going out there like consciously saying, oh, I want to have babies, come on. But subconsciously, it may be that they're looking around, they see an aging population, they may become somewhat preoccupied with sexual things. Japan, a lot of people have said, well, they're so much into pornography that their birth rate's dropping. Well, the men and women both have become obsessed with that particular pastime. But could it be that when a birth rate is so severely low that people start getting a stronger interest in that sort of thing, and therefore that actually causes a reduction in the amount of children being born, because it's an avenue that takes them away from developing a relationship, getting married, and having a family? Could that be it? Could the increase in the amount of popularity of porn amongst men and women in the Western society be in some way related to the idea that this is in some way getting back to some sort of natural, it's an expression of some sort of natural, animalistic sort of endeavor? Obviously, in these people that star in these kinds of films, that they're not going on there for reproductive purposes, but ultimately the brain's stupid. The subconscious is not the brightest, and therefore when it is exposed to these things, it may still gain gratification from it. I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, and maybe a lot of the depression that we see is based in part because of this. Now, think about this one. I read another study, evolutionary psychology study, and it said that it was talking about menopause, but not in women. In men, it was talking about menopause. And it said that there are psychological components to what they call male menopause. And what they found, which was really fascinating, was that it's not the age of the man that determines when he has his so-called midlife crisis. It's the age of his wife that determines it. And the age she reaches physiological menopause, she's no longer able to reproduce, he will actually start developing these kind of throwbacks to courting rituals. Now, I guess you could say in a polygamous society, that would just mean, and you can see this in traditional polygamous societies, where all of a sudden the guy is in his 40s and starts desiring a second or third wife in a traditional polygamous society. We don't live in a traditional polygamous society in the United States or Western Europe. So therefore, what he might, his whole behavior of driving the sports car or doing things that will attract the attention of younger females, most of the time is just seen as, oh, well, midlife crisis. But in a lot of other cases, he's successful. Okay, all of a sudden he gets that attention, meets up with some young woman, and, well, marriages are ruined because they either an affair starts, or the affair leads to the man and woman running off and getting married to each other and abandoning the previous family. And it could be that he's already had his biological period with this person. Now, again, this sounds really like, oh, wow, that's really, that's not very nice. It's like when you point out, for instance, that, what is it, that human beings and pilot whales are the only species that actually go through a menopause. It's also the only species that actually connects to grandchildren bonds. So, in an evolutionary sense, an intact family, husband and wife, they stay together, then are better able to help their offspring with their children, meaning that you make life easier for them, and maybe more babies are produced from the lessening of tension and stress that having a young family can cause. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there, that if you have a situation where the guy doesn't understand what's going on with him, and why he's all of a sudden, maybe he's been very happily married for 30 years, and all of a sudden he just starts noticing women that it actually has to do with at least trying to understand evolutionary psychology. Oh, and another aspect of evolutionary psychology that I wanted to bring up too is that with a society that has turned on itself and fragmented, if we think about the rat studies that were done during I think it was the 1970s, that a lot of you probably read about, that make it sound like when you have urban population, or when you pack rats together in a artificial environment, that they start acting in pathological ways, or they just start acting in ways that were not normally what you see in rat behavior. Well, the thing is that I had a professor in college that pointed out that the rats in those studies, the conclusions most people come up with are flawed, because the rats required, or rats do require, a corner to mate and to nest in. And these rats didn't have it. But if you'd placed corners in with this high density rat population, they're fine. They had homes. And it didn't matter the population density itself. So I'm wondering that maybe some of the stuff that's taking place today is we've designed a society with its expectations so anti-childbirth that this actually is what's causing a lot of what you could consider fragmenting of social bonds and alienation, and basically just a disconnect from the kind of values and lifestyle and happiness that people had 60, 70, 80 years ago, even though they had less stuff. Now we have lots of stuff, but we don't have as much happiness. And now we're starting to go through a period, thanks to our wonderful leaders in the West, where our young people we still have the expectations, but we don't, as a society, have the ability to get all the stuff. So people are chasing after all this material wealth and they're willing to sacrifice family in order to get what's left, what hasn't gone off to another country or been phased out or soon will be replaced with robots. So anyway, I just wanted to throw those thoughts out, and just for people to ponder a little bit. And maybe a lot of what we see today actually has its origin not in some sort of, sociological explanation as much as it's a biological and psychological explanation. If people live more naturally, in that sense, maybe you would have less of these problems and they would be happier people. I did actually have to throw this out. I read a study recently that said something about that the people that were the most happy in the United States, the community where the people were most happy was Orem, Utah. And sure enough, they have a more natural birth rate. There is a higher birth rate in Orem, Utah because of the Mormon population. And I venture to say that if you go out to find these areas of the country that have very low birth rates and probably less desire or less importance placed on family and reproduction, you will find that there is a greater deal of alienation and anxiety. And again, maybe it is biology that's doing it. Only reason I'm throwing this out is for people to at least have something to think about. Okay, something to contemplate when they're looking around. And who knows, maybe you'll find that some of this makes sense and some of it you'll just reject offhand. That's up to you. That's ultimately what we should be doing with media and alternative media, is to try to examine issues that normally aren't examined in the mainstream press. Anyway, that finishes this particular segment of the show, and hope you stay with us for the next segment. Take care, and if you're leaving, then here's wishing you a wonderful what's left of the weekend. Bye now.